This is WXOJLP Northampton, 103.3 FM, your Valley Free radio station. Welcome. I'm Warren Odess Gillett, and this is A Baha'i Perspective. A Baha'i Perspective is a radio program that examines contemporary issues from the perspective of the principles of the Baha'i faith. If you want information specifically on the Baha'i faith, you're welcome to visit the website www.baha'i.org. That's BAHAI.org. Or you can call the toll-free number 1-800-22-UNITE. Today I'm playing an interview with David Gillett, a Baha'i who has lived in Africa in the country of Cameroon for 30 years, teaching English in the public school system. I started the interview by asking David where he grew up and what was it like growing up there.
It was the Lutherville-Timonium area of Baltimore County, Maryland, outside of Baltimore City. A typical suburban upbringing. In my own mind, there is nothing to really distinguish it. It's typically suburban middle-class America, and nothing more.
Okay. So you grew up there all your life? You went to grammar school,
yes,
junior high school, and how long did you stay in the Baltimore County area?
Well, until I graduated from high school. I went to the University of Maryland. After that, I came back to the Baltimore area. I worked on a master's degree at Morgan State University in Baltimore City. And after that, I went abroad. And so I was only in the United States periodically after 1976.
And what did you study at the University of Maryland and for undergraduate?
Well, I started off with sociology with the idea of going into law school afterwards. When I became a Baha'i, the Baha'i faith puts a great deal of emphasis on international service, and I really wanted to see what I could do abroad. The field of law seemed very restrictive for that purpose, and I got sidelined. I went into education instead because that seemed to be a field where I could work anywhere in the world. So that's what I did, and when I went to Cameroon, after doing volunteer work there for about 6 months, I applied for a job with the Ministry of Education in Cameroon, and surprisingly enough, they employed me, and I've been working for them ever since.
Now, how is it that you ran into the Baha'i faith in the first place?
I had some friends in high school who were Baha'is. That's how I first became aware of it. I knew about the Baha'i faith, of course, for a few years before I finally became a Baha'i. I didn't become a Baha'i until I was studying at the University of Maryland.
So you heard about it. How did you go from hearing about it to actually becoming a Baha'i?
Okay, good question. It was, in fact, a long process of a few years. I suppose in my first course was, of course, discovering God Himself. You know, I was raised in a very typical traditional Christian upbringing in the Episcopal Church. I suppose in my early youth, I went through a phase where I really wondered if God existed at all. One of my big questions in life is you look at the world and you see, why is there so much evil in a world created by a loving God? Surely if God was a loving God, He could do better than this, that this kind of a world was rather shabby for a loving God. And the traditional answers which I got from church did not satisfy me. I thought that surely there must be more to it.
What were the answers that you got from
I will go into that in a minute. But nevertheless, man is surely in his heart a spiritual being, and we do yearn for God. And I did come back to God again through Christianity, through Christ, and I became what some people would say born again in my first year of university, where I opened my heart back to God through Christ. I remember I was reading Christ's Sermon on the Mount in my dormitory room, and I said, surely such words are from God. And they spoke to my heart. They were the essence of spirituality and how we should view life. But still, as a Christian, many of my basic answers still went unanswered. Most of my basic questions still went unanswered. The question that I asked before, why is there so much evil in a world created by a loving God, still went as a mystery to me. The traditional answers that I received were, well, this is beyond human understanding. We cannot know this. This is an answer which Billy Graham gave in his public address during the ecumenical meeting after 9/11, ecumenical service organized by President Bush. And he said that he has not come to terms with this question. Why do such bad things happen in a world created by a loving God? But the other answers are, well, Adam and Eve ate the apple, and therefore God banished man from paradise and made man suffer. And the other one was, of course, the devil controls the world, and the devil has usurped God's purpose. And so all of these basic questions really didn't come to grips with my essential doubts as to why the world was the way it is.
They weren't satisfying answers.
Indeed. The first satisfying answers I got were from my Baha'i friends. And basically, it is in a world such as this, where we do experience suffering and we see suffering around us. In such a world, we have the opportunity to develop qualities of generosity, mercy, kindness, sympathy, understanding. If we were living in a world in which, it was a paradise like the Garden of Eden, where we could have anything that we wanted and we would never need anybody and nobody would need us, we would never have the opportunity to develop the qualities of compassion and concern and sympathy for others, detachment from our own needs and more concern for the needs of others. We would never have the ability, the opportunity to work for the betterment of the human condition. But God has put us in a world in which we can work for the betterment of the human condition. Baha'u'llah said, be concerned for the problems of your age. And he said that we created man to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. So these teachings of Baha'u'llah opened up a new world for me. My belief in Christ has always been the same. Christ was from God. But the answers which Christianity has given were insufficient for my heart. So these kinds of answers opened a new world for me, and I become to realize that indeed God again has spoken to man in our age through Baha'u'llah. And I'm sure that on this program you've had an opportunity to talk to your listeners about this very subject, that God has once again sent his chosen one to mankind.
Was there a difficult transition going from Jesus to accepting Baha'u'llah after having accepted Jesus in your heart?
Not at all, because I was not loaded down with doctrines and dogmas as most Christians may have. I was basically a Christian without dogmas. I believed in Christ, knew he was from God, his word was God, his word was God's, and through him we knew God. But as Christ himself said, that he had so much more to tell us, and we could not bear it. But God continues to reveal himself to us. I know one of the Christian dogma of the uniqueness of Christ, that Christ is the only way, that no one was sent by God besides him, is a very big stumbling block for most Christians. That we cannot talk about Buddha and Muhammad and others because God didn't send them. He couldn't have sent them. He only sent Christ. Yet before he sent Christ, he sent Moses, and we must ask ourselves, what was mankind's duty when Moses came? Was it not to accept Moses as God's prophet and obey his law? And if so, didn't those who did so receive God's blessings? And surely they did. And so this was a new way of viewing this particular verse, which is such a stumbling block to Christians. Light is one, no matter from what source it comes. So, in fact, Baha'u'llah and Christ are from one source and have one light. And it is the return of the one light that we found in Christ that is in Baha'u'llah too. So the differences which other people see between God's manifestations, when you rise above the traditional interpretations, you begin to realize that there is no contradiction, that all is one. That they are from one God, and there is basically one way to God. There's never been more than one way to God, and that is through the prophets and the manifestations which God has sent.
So you became a Baha'i at university?
At the University of Maryland. At the University of Maryland. When I began seeing the answers to all my questions being answered in the writings of Baha'u'llah, I realized that Baha'u'llah is in fact from God.
And then you got your graduate degree in education at Morgan State?
That's right.
Now how is it? That's a primarily African-American institution?
Indeed it was, but I, just by chance, some work-study program fell into my lap. It was just like I was saying, well, I did not want to continue with law as my original plan, and education seemed to be the right course. And just suddenly the opportunity to go into a work-study program at Morgan State University just fell in front of me. A close friend said, hey, this is available. You want to do education, do this. And I said, why not? And certainly the fact that I'm not from an African-American background was not going to stop me from taking up an opportunity. So, yes, the Morgan State University is predominantly an African-American university, but I enjoyed my time there. And I think I gained a lot from the experience.
So then what happened after you got your master's at Morgan State?
Well, the Baha'i community gives a lot of emphasis on international service. So I contacted the National Baha'i Office in Wilmette, Illinois, and said, I'm available. Where am I needed? And they said, well, Cameroon is where we need people. So the next thing I knew, I'm off to Cameroon.
Now, I heard a different story.
Okay. Go ahead.
I heard a story that they called you, they asked you if you are interested in international service, and you were thinking of, well, what could I say for, no, I can't say I'm married, can't say I'm going to school.
Yes, there is a bit of truth in that. I didn't go to all these details, but in fact, I did send in. I wrote to the National Baha'i Center in Wilmette and expressed my desire to go. And then they did call me in response to my request and did say they needed someone in Cameroon. then for a moment at least, for a little while, the reality of leaving my country became more than just an idealistic notion, but something that was right in front of me. So I did make a few attempts at an excuse as to back out of my offer. And I was thinking, well, but I had no real excuses to offer. I said I didn't know the language in Cameroon, but they said, no, you'll learn it. So I said, okay, I can't get out of this now. I have already volunteered, and they have asked me to go. So there's no getting around it now. So off I went.
And what happened when you got off the plane in Cameroon?
Actually, I was met by Baha'i friends in Cameroon who welcomed me into their home. It was a very wonderful occasion. I went to Cameroon with no contact information. One might say that I was a bit young and inexperienced. I would
never. And how old were you, and what year was that?
That was 1976. I was 24 at the time. Old enough to know better, but evidently not old enough to gain. I would never tell anybody go abroad and just go there without any contact information. But
was anybody expecting you?
Indeed, they were.
But they didn't know when, or
no. The National Baha'i Center knew when I was going, and they had told me that they were going to inform the friends at the other end when I was coming. So I put the whole issue out of my mind. I didn't bother to request for a name or a phone number of somebody when I got there. I said, okay, they know that I'm coming. Fine. So I land at the airport without a worry in the world, and there are people who just came up to me and they didn't know anything about what I looked like, but they just walked right up to me and said, "Are you David Gillett?" And it was rather funny. They said they were looking at all the people coming off the plane, and they said, "Who looks like a Baha'i to them?" And they just came up to me right off and said, "Am I David Gillett?" And I said, "Yeah, no doubt."
Yeah, the Baha'i is the one that kind of looks lost when they get off the plane.
Maybe.
So tell me a little bit about the makeup of Cameroon and the culture. And I believe there's a Francophone section and an Anglophone section of...
Indeed, it is a bilingual country. It was colonized originally by the Germans. After World War I, the French and the English divided it among themselves. So there is an English-speaking zone and a French-speaking zone. As a result, before what they call reunification, there were two Cameroons, but...
What do they call them?
They called it British Cameroon and French Cameroon, and jointly they were referred to in the plural as the Cameroons. Oh, okay. But after independence, they put part of them back together again. Part of the British Cameroon decided to join the French-speaking part. Part of it decided to join Nigeria. The part that... one part did join. So that's why Cameroon is a bilingual country. It's also divided religiously between the Christian South and the Muslim North.
So the language division seems to match the...
No, they don't, because the language division is divided east and west, but the religious division is divided north and south. But there are at least some Christians everywhere and some Muslims everywhere. And in fact, with so much travel, you find French-speaking people everywhere and English-speaking people everywhere. But anyway, the zones remain, they still exist. They still have predominantly English-speaking areas and French-speaking areas.
The part that went to Nigeria, was there something unique about that part from the other two?
Yes, that part was part of the Muslim North. So they felt they had more in common with the Nigerian North. Mm-hmm. But the part of Cameroon, which was the Christian South, they felt they had more in common with the French-speaking section, their neighbors. So they decided to go that way. And truly, in the southern part of the country, the Anglophone provinces are very much culturally associated with the French-speaking Cameroonian provinces. Very similar.
And what part did you land in when you first arrived?
For the first 6 months, I traveled a little bit everywhere. When I first got a job, I went to the Muslim North for the first year and a half, and it was hot and flat and dry. And Kribi was a very small town. You could go to the edge of that town. You could walk through the whole town. I lived on one edge of the town. In the evening, when it was cool, I would walk to the other edge of the town, which only took about 15 minutes. And then I would walk back again. And when you got to the edge of the town just stopped, and you just looked across the savannah, which was dry and flat. You could just walk out there forever. And the roads that went from town to town, they just went right across the savannah. When they got to a tree, they would go around the tree, and then the road would keep going. It was the tire tracks that marked the road. If you could follow the tire tracks, you would know where the road is. Otherwise, the difference between the road and where the road wasn't, was a little difference. So it was hot there. I remember I spent a year and a half. My students visited me often where I stayed. At the end of the year and a half, they said I was transferred down to the southern part of the country. And my students would come and say, "Why don't you stay longer? You haven't seen all of Gillett." And
Which is what, the province, or?
And just that was the town.
Oh.
That was the town.
Well, you said
the town
Kribi
that. Oh yes, that was a mistake. Kribi is where I was transferred to in the south.
Oh, I see.
I went to Kribi, but I was in Gillett, and of course, as I said, you took only a few minutes to walk through it, and that's all there was. So after a year and a half, my students felt that I had not yet learned all there was to Gillett. And I said, well, that's one person's view. I felt that after the first month, I had seen all that there was to see. But the people were very nice. The students were angels. Totally different than other places where I have been. I would walk into the classroom, and the students would immediately become quiet, and never did I ever have to ask a student to be quiet. I had their attention, I had their cooperation. It was just a wonderful environment. I remember when I went down to Kribi in the south, it was completely different. The students had no self-control whatsoever. I could walk in and stand in front of the classroom till the end of the period, waiting for them to be quiet, and they would be noisy throughout that period. It was very challenging.
And what would you account why there was that difference?
I can't really say. I really can't really say. It is true that the Muslim culture in the north is very old, goes back generations.
Not so in the Christian?
Not so in the Christian South. In the Muslim North, with the coming of the European colonial powers, they did not change the culture so much. They continued to be what they were, what they had been for centuries upon centuries. The Christian South had gone through a great deal. The European colonial powers had sort of transformed the culture. They had been taken away from their traditional religious beliefs. They had adopted Christianity. Maybe they did not quite really know who they were, in a way.
But you're saying, and the colonization occurred, what, in the 19th century?
That's right.
And
then,
so
mostly in the 20th century. In the 19th century, of course, was the first contact, but it was not until the early 20th century did you see any any serious colonialization. And in fact, it was after World War I that the French and the British went in any really big way to take advantage of the natural resources.
And that's when the people got converted from whatever their native customs were to more
yes,
European
that's right.
oriented culture.
Right. Conversion started with the establishment of schools and hospitals, and when the children came to the Christian schools, of course, they were taught Christianity, and it took several generations for the people to acquire a Christian identity.
Now, why do you think that happened there but not in the North?
Well, the North, they had their religion and their holy book, the Quran, and it goes back, as I said, for centuries. And Islam allows for a common set of beliefs and religious practices. In the South, before Christianity, they did have very many traditional religious beliefs, but they differed from area to area. There was no common set of practices. They may have been similar from area to area, but not exactly the same. So that there was not a common identity among them. People identified themselves, of course, according to their tribe and their village. There was no common identity on a larger scale. This presents some problems with many African nations today, because for a nation to be successful, the people have to have a common identity of the nation that they belong to, and they're working together for the good of that nation. But if they put their village, their tribe as their main identity, sometimes the good of their region becomes a greater concern than the good of the nation as a whole. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in some countries, tribal wars break out, and this results in civil wars. Cameroon is at least blessed because they have so many tribes and local languages. And in fact, this has been a blessing because they don't form large groups that start fighting each other. Mm-hmm. They live with their diversity.
So there's no clear demarcation anymore between the diverse religious and cultural or language populations?
There can be, but not enough to cause differences. At times, the Christian South and the Muslim North, there have been incidences and perhaps, occasional crises which may have created divisions between these two parts. But mostly, we thank God that nothing has erupted. They generally live together in peace, and may it continue so. Yeah. Because wars in Africa, or anywhere else for that matter, have never really helped for the betterment of society. It's countries which have gone into war, they just sink deeper and deeper into it, and they never come out. And this is true. Uganda is trying to come out now after a long period of time. Liberia is trying to come out, but this they're still struggling to do so, and it has only come after decades of suffering.
Now, what age group? What was the age of the kids you were teaching in when you?
They're
up in the what do you call the northern part?
The northern, yes, in Gillett. That was the town where I taught. Yeah. And mostly during that year and a half, I taught the middle age group of let's say 14 and 15 and 16-year-olds, sometimes older, but I taught that middle group. There were, of course, younger grades and older grades in the school, but that was the age group that I mostly worked with.
And that was, what subject did you teach?
English language. Their language is a second language for them. English is a second language for them.
And what did you use for a curriculum?
I was given very little. I had my textbook, and Of course, I did student teaching in the U.S., but not as teaching English as a second language. So I really had to learn as I went. I had a textbook, I had a blackboard, and I had a piece of chalk, and those were all the equipment I had. So with that, I had to pick up my methods as I went along.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you had something pretty much established when you moved to Kribi?
Of course, I had picked up a lot of experience in that year and a half, and during the 30 years that I've been teaching, I continued to pick up experience. There's no time in which I don't learn something new. And really, even when I went to Kribi, although I had a better idea of how to go about it, I still learned more as I went.
Now, what was the class size in Gillett versus Kribi?
Throughout my experiences everywhere in Cameroon, class sizes have always been above 50 and sometimes up to 100. But in recent years, my class sizes have been in the 80s.
It's gone down.
Oh, it goes up and down. It really goes up and down. But I remember in the north, in Gillett, that was many years ago now, but surely there were not less than 60 students in my class, and that was the same in Kribi in the south. Now I'm teaching in Bamenda.
And where is that in relation to Kribi?
That's Kribi is way down south along the coast. Bamenda is in the northwest. It's in the northwest. It's
sort of a transition between one.
Right. You
and the
begin
other.
to be in an area where you find a great deal of both religious groups, both Muslims and Christians. Still more Christians than Muslims there.
And when you say Christians, is it Protestant, Catholic?
I think that it's basically must be half and half, Catholics and Protestants. The Catholics, of course, are the largest group, about half the population. The Protestant half is a division of many, many different religious groups. Some large ones that we know, like the Baptists and the Presbyterians, but many, many small ones are there as well.
And what's the receptivity of the Cameroonian people to the message of the Baha'i faith?
There are always people who are receptive to it, and that is why we have a very wonderful Baha'i community in Cameroon. People have stumbling blocks. I consider them my countrymen now. I consider myself part of, but I have discovered that for so many Christians that I meet, their primary concern is how to get to heaven, how to be saved, how to be saved. And I wonder if they really know what being saved is, because as a Baha'i I have learned that being saved is a transformation of your character. This is the essence of what being born again means, is being transformed from what you were before to something much better. It involves spiritual growth. It involves learning to be more dependent upon God, to be more detached from the material world, to be more concerned with the needs of others, to think about the betterment of the world, to know that all of our good spiritual qualities come through the grace of God, that through our prayers God assists us to grow spiritually and to develop our qualities. They come through God's assistance and God's grace, but first through our desire to grow spiritually, through our efforts and our prayers. And this is what redemption is all about. being lost and discovering yourself as a true child of God and living as a child of God. This is what spiritual growth and redemption is truly about. It is not simply about avoiding punishment and getting a reward, saying that that I do not wish to criticize another person's doctrine, but truly there is more to God's plan than saying, well, we deserve to be punished and condemned, but as Christ was condemned in our place, we will not be condemned, but rather we will go into paradise. Truly, it is very limited doctrine. It doesn't concern itself with human beings becoming better people and being transformed and acquiring the spiritual graces, the spiritual qualities through God's grace and assistance. This is the situation. Most people, sadly to say, are mostly concerned with how to get to heaven, how to be, as they say, quote unquote, saved, which in their mind means that they have believed in God and Christ, and so they will go to heaven, and they will not go to hell as they otherwise would have. And that is their only concern. You talk about the betterment of the world, and they say, but how am I going to get to heaven? And you talk about acquiring spiritual qualities, and that's okay, but how do I get to heaven? It has become a real stumbling block for them. And I now understand why Baha'u'llah says that we should have faith in God and put our faith in God and not be concerned with either punishment or reward. And Christians ask me, not be concerned with punishment or reward, but truly you believe in Christ because of the reward. And how can you say that you believe in God and Christ and you're not concerned with the reward? And I tell a little story that hopefully helps them. And I say, okay, let's say you are a parent of a child and you have to go on a journey and you have to leave your child with a trusted friend. And you might say to your friend, please take care of my child for these few days while I travel, and when I come back I will bring you a nice present. And your friend readily accepts to take care of your child. Now the friend could say, okay, I'm taking care of the child for my friend, and I'm going to get a nice present when he comes back. Or you can say, well, I love my friend and I'm going to take care of my friend's child regardless of whether or not my friend remembers to bring me a present or not. And you take care of the child for the love of your friend rather than for the reward that you're going to get out of it. People accept this story and they say, okay, so we love God and we serve God without thought of what reward or punishment we will get. It becomes love, unconditional love, not love for the thought of what you get in return.
Very good. Now, you have developed a family since going there as a young man in 1976. So tell me about how that came into being.
Well, I met my beloved wife, who is from Iran. Her name is Manal Aghdassi. Her name was Manal Aghdassi, still is Manal Aghdassi, Gillett. Anyway, she came from Iran to an international Baha'i conference in Cameroon. Of course, first to attend the conference, but also to look at the country and to see if she would like to settle there, to serve the faith, as I had done with that same intention. And that was 2 years after I had been there, actually 3. She came in 1978 for that international conference. And our meeting is a little sweet for me. I remember we were both late for breakfast. They were serving breakfast each day, and the conference was being held at the University of Yaoundé's campus, and we had breakfast in the dining halls in the university. Anyway, I was late for breakfast on one of the early first days of the conference, so I was rushing to get there. And by chance, she was also late. She was just a little later than I was because she was walking a few steps behind me. I didn't know there was somebody behind me as I was approaching the door. As I was approaching the door and ready to open it, I heard a voice greet me, "Good morning." So I turned around and I found a very beautiful young girl standing there, and I quickly tried to think of a clever response, and I said, well, good morning too. And so I opened the door. So we had breakfast together. Since we had arrived late, we just had breakfast together. We talked, had a good conversation. We attended the morning session of the conference, and then we had lunch together. Then we attended the afternoon session of the conference and had dinner together, and this continued, and the rest is history. We have one.
Well, she went back to Iran.
She did, because she did not originally come to settle. She went back to Iran to settle her affairs, and then she came again. She was leaving Iran right in the middle of the revolution, the Islamic Revolution, in the closing months of 1978. There was rioting everywhere, a lot of burning of buildings. Her plane was supposed to take off at a certain hour of the day. Maybe it was 3 o'clock, and at that very hour she was still in her house because she could not get any taxi to the airport. She could not find transport to the airport. The whole city was in chaos. She had a good friend who agreed to take her there. So she got to the airport way late, long after the plane should have been gone. But the plane had not gone because none of the other passengers had been able to come either. So the plane was sitting there empty, waiting for the passengers to come. So finally, when they had enough passengers had arrived that they could now take off, they did. So Manon made that plane and returned to Cameroon here. She remembered driving to the airport with her friend and watching the Pepsi Cola company factory in Iran burning down. And,
yeah. So she arrived in Cameroon, the same location that you were at, or what? Was
after our meeting at the conference, during the course of things, I proposed. So she came to live with me. At that time, I was living in Kribi. She had never been to Kribi before. So when we got married, I took my new bride to my hometown. My home became her home, and she quickly started arranging things as she thought should be arranged, which was, of course, much better than I could have done. In fact, as I had lived there, I had arranged nothing. I had been living like Gandhi with wooden cardboard boxes. So she fixed things up.
That's good.
She made my life decent.
And then you had a son?
Yes, Ramin was born in 1981. We wanted to have other children, but for reasons unknown, she had difficulty. She had a series of miscarriages. She had a child who died at birth at one point. So as we got older, we realized we were getting beyond the normal childbearing age, so we just gave it up. And as my own mother says, it's quality, not quantity. So we are satisfied with our one son, and he's a fine young man. He is finishing up at the University of North Carolina soon. He has just been 2 months doing some social service in Rwanda, trying to help some development agencies there think of what to do to help after the genocide some years ago. Although that terrible time has passed by a number of years, the country has not really fully recovered. So there's still a lot of work to do. So he was there in Rwanda. visiting the field, doing field work, I suppose, going to villages and taking note of what the situation was in these villages so that people would later use this information to decide what might be done.
Mm. So what does the future hold for you, David?
Good question. Good question. One never knows the future. When I came to Cameroon, my father said, how long will you be there? And I said, well, at least a year or two to see how things are. And that year or two has become over about 30 years now. 30 years, 76 to 2006. I always say that I will stay as long as the situation permits, which might be till the rest of my life, the way things are going. But Africa is a continent of instability. We pray for Africa, hope for the best, but one can never be too sure of how things will go. So, God willing, I will remain there. Maybe I will bury my bones there. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But the future is finally in God's hands.
Mm-hmm. Didn't your mom have an interesting dream about your destiny?
Well, yes. Anyway, she had difficulty with her first son, my older brother John, and they had to have an operation, probably a rather major one, I would think, for such a small baby. My brother was only a day or two old when they discovered he couldn't swallow food. It had to be the first day, surely, that they discovered that he couldn't swallow food. And obviously that's fatal. So they had to do an operation on him, and that must have been rather serious for such a newborn infant. So I'm sure that my mother thought that she was going to lose her first son, but God willing, she didn't. So when I was born, she prayed to God that if I was born healthy and no problems, she would give me to Him, give me to God. This is what her prayer was. So I don't know if she thought about this prayer afterwards, but when I went to Africa to serve the faith, serve the Baha'i faith, she began thinking about that prayer. And she says, oh no, it's because of that prayer that she has lost me to Africa. She wanted me to be in the Baltimore area where she could see me on a regular basis. And then she said, if I had not said that prayer, he wouldn't be there now. And so she said she lived in regret for that prayer for years. She says, never promise anything to God. God will somehow time cash in on it. And so that's the story.
Well, David, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to interview you.
It was good to be here.
And good luck in the future.
Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with David Gillett, a school teacher for 30 years in the African country of Cameroon. For a copy of this and other interviews, you're welcome to go to the website www.abahaiperspective.com.